I sent it. The confirmation appeared on my phone. Transfer complete. Amount $1. I stared at the tiny number for another second before adding the memo. Congratulations. Then I pressed send. For almost a full minute, I sat in complete silence at my kitchen table, listening to the old grandfather clock my wife and I had bought 29 years earlier. Tick, tick, tick. Outside, the neighborhood looked exactly the same as it had every summer morning in Columbus, Ohio. A teenager jogged past wearing headphones. Mr. Jenkins across the street struggled to back his boat into the driveway. Somewhere nearby, a lawnmower started. The world hadn't changed. Mine had. I picked up another phone. Franklin Locksmith. Hi, I said calmly. I'd like every lock on my house replaced today. Everything. Front door, back door, garage, side entrance. The man hesitated. Lost your keys? No. You worried somebody copied them? I looked toward the family photo hanging above the fireplace. My daughter has one. I understand. I'd also like a keypad installed. We can be there in an hour. Perfect. When I hung up, I walked through the house one last time while every lock still belonged to the past. The front door, the kitchen entrance, the sliding glass door overlooking the little vegetable garden Mary and I had planted before cancer stole her from us. Each lock carried memories. Each key had once meant trust. Not anymore. 3 hours later, the locksmith finished loading his tools. He handed me 2 brand new keys. Nobody gets in unless you want them to. I nodded. That's exactly the point. He drove away. 20 minutes later, someone pounded on my front door. Hard. Dad, I recognized my daughter's voice instantly. What the hell? The doorknob rattled violently. My key doesn't work. I didn't answer. She pounded again. Dad, open this door. Another voice joined hers, her husband. Open up, Richard. I walked slowly toward the entryway, but stayed behind the closed door. I can hear you, I said. Dad, what is wrong with you? Nothing. My key doesn't work. I know. What do you mean you know? I had the locks changed. Silence. Then anger. You changed the locks. Yes. You can't do that. I already did. Her husband stepped closer. This is ridiculous. No, I replied quietly. This is overdue. My daughter sounded almost frantic. We just need to talk. We've had plenty of chances to talk. She hit the door again. Please open it. I leaned my forehead against the wood. No. Another 30 seconds passed. Then I heard her whisper something to her husband. He pulled out his phone. 5 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled into my driveway. That was the moment I realized how strange life could become. 34 years earlier, I had carried that little girl into this very house, wrapped in a pink blanket after bringing her home from Riverside Hospital. Now she was standing outside trying to convince police officers that I had locked her out of a house that had never legally belonged to anyone but me. Funny how life works. My name is Richard Lawson. I'm 66 years old. For 30 years, I worked as an electrician for the city of Columbus. Nothing glamorous. Nothing anybody would write about. I fixed traffic signals, street lighting, government buildings, schools, libraries. If something lost power, chances were someone called our crew. I wasn't rich, never expected to be, but I slept well every night because every dollar I earned came honestly. My wife Mary used to joke that I could repair anything except my own coffee maker. She wasn't wrong. She died 22 years ago. Breast cancer. Emily, our daughter, was 12. People told me to remarry. I never did. Not because I stopped loving women, because every spare hour belonged to my little girl. I learned how to braid hair. I burned more pancakes than any father should admit. I sat through dance recitals where I couldn't tell one routine from another, but clapped louder than anyone. When boys eventually started calling the house, well, let's just say I suddenly enjoyed answering the phone. Emily always laughed. Dad? What? You scared him. Good. You embarrassed me. That's part of the job. Back then, she hugged me anyway. Money was always tight. There were years I skipped vacations. Years I drove trucks that probably should have retired before I did. I repaired appliances instead of replacing them. Not because I enjoyed being cheap, because college wasn't going to pay for itself. Emily graduated from Ohio State without student loans. I still remember watching her walk across that stage. I cried. She pretended not to notice. Later, she hugged me. We did it. No, I said. You did. She smiled. We both did. Those might have been the happiest words I ever heard. Things changed after she met Brandon. He wasn't a bad man, at least not in the beginning. He worked for a consulting firm in Chicago before transferring to Columbus. Expensive suits, luxury watches, perfect smile, perfect teeth. The kind of guy who somehow made every restaurant feel like it belonged to him. His parents had money, real money, lake house, country club membership, international vacations every year. The first time I met them, Brandon's mother looked around my dining room with the polite smile people wear when they're trying not to criticize something. This home has character, I smiled back. It has memories. She nodded politely. I suppose. Emily laughed with them. That hurt more than I admitted. Over the next 2 years, little things started changing. Emily stopped asking me to dinner. Birthdays became shorter visits. Christmas gifts became gift cards mailed through Amazon. Phone calls lasted 3 minutes instead of 30. Whenever Brandon's parents hosted parties, I somehow wasn't available, or maybe they weren't. Eventually, I stopped asking. It hurt less. At least I thought it did. Until one Sunday afternoon, Emily called, "Dad, can I come over?" Of course. She arrived alone. No smile, no hug. She sat at my kitchen table, turning her coffee cup in circles. Finally, she looked up. "I need to tell you something." I waited. "The wedding guest list." My stomach tightened. She couldn't even look me in the eyes. "Brandon and I think—" She stopped, then whispered the sentence that changed everything. "We don't think you should come." I honestly thought I had misheard her. "I'm sorry." She took a deep breath. "It isn't personal. It feels personal." She looked away toward the window. "You'd ruin the wedding photos." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. I just stared at my daughter across the same kitchen table where she'd done homework every afternoon after school. The table still had tiny scratches from when she was 10 and insisted on carving her initials into the underside with a pocket knife she'd found in the garage. I remembered pretending to be angry. Mary would have laughed. Emily had cried because she thought I was upset. I hugged her before bedtime and told her some things were more valuable because they carried memories. Now I wondered if she remembered any of them. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No," I said quietly. "You're not." Her eyes dropped to the coffee mug between her hands. "I am." "Then tell me the truth." I did. "No." I leaned back in my chair. "You gave me the edited version." She rubbed her forehead. "Dad." "No, don't protect me from it. I can handle the truth better than excuses." She inhaled slowly, then let the words come. "Brandon's parents think—" She stopped again. "They think what? They think you'll look out of place." I almost smiled. "Out of place," she nodded. "It's a very elegant wedding." "I know. They've invited people from New York, Chicago, San Francisco." "So?" She looked embarrassed. "They're worried." "About what?" She finally forced herself to answer. "They're worried people will wonder who you are." I couldn't help it. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was unbelievable. "They'll wonder who I am." She nodded. "They won't believe—" She couldn't finish. "Say it." "They won't believe you're my father." That one landed harder than anything else. Not because of what she'd said, because she believed it. I looked down at my hands, the hands she'd held crossing busy streets, the hands that had built her treehouse, the hands that fixed her bicycle after every crash, the hands that worked overtime through freezing Ohio winters so she could go to summer camp with her friends. They weren't elegant hands. They were electrician's hands, scarred, rough, strong. Apparently, they no longer fit into wedding pictures. "I bought a new suit," I said softly. She looked surprised. "What?" "I bought one last month." "You did?" "I thought I'd wear it to your wedding." She blinked several times. "I didn't know." "Of course you didn't." I smiled sadly. It was supposed to be a surprise. The suit was still hanging in my bedroom closet. Navy blue, tailored, the nicest piece of clothing I'd ever owned. The salesman had asked whether it was for a funeral. I smiled. "No, my daughter's wedding." He shook my hand. "Congratulations." I drove home feeling happier than I had in years. Now it would probably stay in the garment bag forever. Emily wiped a tear from her cheek. "I never wanted to hurt you." "No, you just wanted to avoid being embarrassed." "Dad, please. I'm trying to understand." "You don't understand how complicated this has become." I folded my hands together. "Help me." She took a long breath. "Brandon's family is paying for most of the wedding." "I know. They've invited business partners." "I understand. They've spent almost $90,000. I nodded. So, they have a certain image, and I don't fit into it. She closed her eyes. No, you don't. There it was. The truth. Simple. Clean. Painful. I stood and walked toward the window overlooking the backyard. The old maple tree was still there. Emily used to climb it every Saturday morning. One summer, she'd fallen from the lowest branch and scraped both knees. She cried so hard I carried her inside. After I cleaned the cuts, she looked up at me and asked, "You'll always catch me, right?" "I'll always try." That promise had lasted my entire life. Apparently, hers had expired. I suppose Brandon agrees with this. Emily hesitated. He thinks it's best. Does he? He doesn't want any tension. I nodded slowly. So the solution is to remove your father. She didn't answer. Tell me something. What? If your mother were alive? Emily immediately started crying. Please don't. Would she be invited? That's different. Why? Because Mom... She stopped. I turned around. Because Mom would have looked better in the photographs. She covered her face. Dad? I walked over and gently placed my hand on her shoulder. You don't have to explain anymore. I already understand. She looked at me with desperate hope. You're not angry. I thought about that. No, that surprised her. I'm heartbroken. But I'm not angry. She reached for my hand. I'm still your daughter. You always will be. Can we move past this? I smiled. That's entirely up to you. She frowned. What does that mean? It means someday you'll have children. She looked confused. And one day they'll teach you how every decision echoes longer than you expect. Before leaving, she stood in the hallway. I hope you'll understand someday. I nodded. I already do. She smiled with obvious relief. She thought I'd accepted it. Maybe I had. Acceptance isn't the same thing as forgetting. The wedding took place 3 weeks later at a luxury country club outside Columbus. I didn't go, obviously. Instead, I drove to Blendon Woods Metro Park early that morning. Mary loved walking there. I sat on a bench beside the lake for nearly 2 hours, watching families feed ducks. Several fathers were teaching little girls how to skip stones across the water. I smiled. Life has strange timing. That evening, my neighbor Walter knocked on my door carrying a peach pie his wife had baked. You doing okay? I'm fine. He didn't believe me. You would have been at the wedding today. I would have. He handed me the pie. My Linda would have wanted you to have this. We sat on the porch eating pie in silence. Sometimes old friends understand that silence is kinder than advice. Later that night, my phone buzzed. Someone had tagged Emily in wedding photographs online. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. There she was, beautiful, radiant, happy, standing beside Brandon beneath strings of white lights. His parents, his grandparents, his cousins, his college roommates, even co-workers I'd never met. Every important person in her new life seemed to be there, except one. There wasn't an empty chair with my name. There wasn't a place reserved for me that had gone unused. There wasn't even evidence I had ever existed. It was as though my daughter had edited me out of her life long before the photographer edited the pictures. I set my phone down. For the first time since Mary died, I cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a man mourning someone who was still alive. 4 days passed. No phone call, no apology, no thank you for respecting her wishes. Nothing. On the 5th morning, while watering tomatoes in my backyard, my phone vibrated. Emily. For one foolish second, I smiled. Maybe she'd realized what she'd done. Maybe she wanted to come over. Maybe she wanted to rebuild what we'd broken. I dried my hands on my jeans and opened the message. It read, Morning, Dad. We need $5,500 for our Dubai honeymoon. We came up a little short after the wedding. Could you help us out? I stared at the screen. I read it once, then again. Not a single word about the wedding. Not one apology. Not even a simple, how are you? Just another request. Only this time, something inside me finally became quiet. I didn't answer the text right away. Instead, I slipped my phone back into my pocket and finished watering the tomatoes. That probably sounds strange. My daughter had just asked me for $5,500 less than a week after excluding me from her wedding, and I was standing there worrying about tomato plants. But that's what happens when you get older. You learn that reacting immediately usually makes things worse. The tomatoes needed water. My anger didn't. After I finished in the backyard, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on the porch. The morning air was warm, but not uncomfortable. Across the street, Mr. Jenkins was washing his pickup truck, while his grandson sprayed more water onto himself than onto the tires. The little boy couldn't have been more than 6. "Grandpa," he shouted, "look." He held up a tiny bluegill he'd caught in the neighborhood pond. Mr. Jenkins dropped the sponge and walked over like the fish weighed 50 pounds. "Well, would you look at that?" The little boy grinned from ear to ear. Watching them together made me smile. Then I looked down at my phone again. Emily's message was still sitting there. No greeting, no apology, no acknowledgement that she'd erased me from one of the biggest days of her life. Just, "We need $5,500. Funny how 4 words can tell you everything you need to know. I opened our old text conversation, not just the recent messages, the whole thing. Years of conversations. I slowly scrolled upward. There were birthday wishes, pictures of her dog, questions about recipes, videos she'd sent me of my granddaughter. No, there wasn't a granddaughter. That wasn't my story. I smiled at myself, wishful thinking. I kept scrolling. The farther back I went, the warmer the conversations became. "Dad, I got the job. Dad, thanks for helping me move. Dad, I miss Mom today. Dad, can we have dinner Sunday?" Then somewhere around the time Brandon entered her life, everything changed. "Dad, can you loan us $800? Dad, could you co-sign something? Dad, can you watch the dog? Dad, we're a little short this month. Dad, can you? Dad, we need, Dad?" I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Over the previous 2 years, not once had she asked how I was doing. Not once. I wasn't a father anymore. I had quietly become a resource, a backup account, an emergency fund. I wasn't angry with Emily, not in that moment. I was angry with myself, because I'd helped create this. Every time she'd asked for money, I'd found a reason to say yes. She's just getting started. Young couples struggle. That's what parents do. Maybe all of that was true. But I'd forgotten something equally important. Parents aren't supposed to finance disrespect. Around noon, my phone rang. "Walter. You busy?" "Not really." "Want to grab lunch?" 30 minutes later, we were sitting inside a little diner we'd both been going to for almost 20 years. The waitress knew our names. She didn't even ask what Walter wanted. "Cheeseburger with onion rings." "You know me too well." She looked at me. "The usual meatloaf," I smiled. "You read minds." After she walked away, Walter leaned across the table. "You look tired." "I am." "Wedding still bothering you?" I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I handed him my phone. He read Emily's message. His eyebrows climbed. "She actually sent this morning." He read it again. "No apology." "No." He looked at me for a long moment. "So, what are you going to do?" "I honestly don't know." Walter nodded slowly. "You know what my dad used to tell me? What if people only remember your phone number when they need money?" He shrugged. "They're not calling because they miss you." That sentence stayed with me all afternoon. Back home, I walked into the spare bedroom. Most people would have called it a guest room. I still called it Emily's room, even though she'd moved out almost 10 years earlier. Her old bookshelf was still there. So was the faded quilt Mary had sewn by hand. Inside the closet sat several boxes she'd never bothered taking. School trophies, dance shoes, old stuffed animals, a shoebox filled with birthday cards I'd written every year. On top of one box sat a framed crayon drawing. Stick figures, one little girl, one tall man. Above us, she'd written in giant uneven letters, "My dad is my hero." I sat on the edge of the bed holding that picture for nearly 15 minutes. What happened to that little girl? Or maybe a better question was, when did I stop seeing the woman she'd become? Late that afternoon, I drove to the bank. Not because I needed cash, because I needed time. Sometimes driving helps me think. By the time I parked, I'd made my decision. I wasn't going to lecture Emily. I wasn't going to argue. I wasn't going to send a long, emotional message listing every sacrifice I'd made. People already know what they've done. They don't need a speech. They need consequences. I opened my banking app, typed $1 memo. Congratulations. My thumb hovered over the screen. For just a second, I wondered if I was being petty. Then I remembered standing outside my own daughter's wedding in my imagination, knowing I hadn't even been given the chance to attend. I pressed send. A strange feeling washed over me. Not satisfaction, not revenge, relief. The next phone call wasn't to my daughter. It was to Franklin Locksmith. "I'd like every lock replaced," the man asked why. "My daughter has a key." "You think she'll come by?" "I know she will. And you don't want her inside? I looked around the quiet house. No, I don't. An appointment was scheduled for the following morning. That evening, I drove to the cemetery. Mary had been gone 22 years, but talking to her still felt natural. I placed fresh white lilies beside her headstone. I think you'd be disappointed in both of us, I said quietly. The difference is, I smiled through tired eyes, you'd probably tell me to forgive her. A breeze moved through the oak trees. I will. But not today. The locksmith arrived at 9 the next morning. Professional, quick, friendly. Within 2 hours, every lock had been replaced. The garage keypad had a new code. The spare key hidden beneath the flower pot disappeared forever. When he finished, he handed me 2 new keys. You're all set. I thanked him. After he left, I stood inside the front hallway. For the first time in years, my home actually felt like mine again. Not because I'd locked my daughter out, because I'd finally stopped leaving the door wide open to being taken for granted. At exactly 2:17 that afternoon, my doorbell camera chimed. Someone was standing on my porch. Emily, beside her, Brandon. Emily smiled as if nothing had happened. Then she reached into her purse, pulled out her old house key, and slid it into the lock. Nothing happened. She frowned, tried again. Still nothing. Then she looked up at the camera. Dad. A few seconds later, the pounding began. The pounding grew louder. Dad! Emily's voice echoed across the quiet neighborhood. I know you're in there. I stood just inside the foyer, one hand resting on the new doorknob. The fresh brass lock gleamed in the afternoon sunlight, streaming through the side window. Funny. A $200 lock suddenly felt more valuable than every expensive wedding decoration I'd never seen. Brandon pounded next. Richard, I know you can hear us. I answered through the closed door. The pounding stopped. Emily sounded relieved. Then opened the door. No, silence. What? I said no. Dad, stop acting like this. I'm not acting. She rattled the doorknob again. My key doesn't work. I know. You changed the locks? Yes. Why would you do that? I took a slow breath. Because they belong to a different chapter of my life. Brandon stepped closer to the door. This is ridiculous. No, I replied calmly. This is called setting boundaries. Emily laughed nervously. Dad, seriously, we're family. I closed my eyes for a moment. Family. Interesting word. It hadn't seemed very important when they finalized the wedding guest list. It wasn't very long ago, I said, that I apparently didn't fit the image of your family. Dad, so why does family suddenly matter today? Neither of them answered. Emily tried a softer approach. We just came to talk. You've had plenty of opportunities. I wanted to explain. You already did. No, I mean, she sighed. I've been thinking. I imagine you have. We shouldn't have handled everything the way we did. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd heard, but it still wasn't one. I appreciate that, she sounded hopeful. So what? Can we come inside? No, just for a few minutes. No. Brandon's patience disappeared. This is childish. I smiled despite myself. I was thinking the same thing. You sent us $1. Yes. What was that supposed to mean? It meant congratulations. You know exactly what you were doing. I do. Emily interrupted before the argument escalated. Dad, we really need that money. There it was. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I miss you. Not, I love you. Money. Always back to money. I unlocked the small side window next to the front door and opened it just enough for conversation. Emily looked exhausted. The excitement from her wedding pictures had vanished. Dark circles rested beneath her eyes. Brandon looked irritated more than anything else. Dad, she began, the honeymoon isn't completely paid for. I know. We've already booked everything. I figured. If we cancel now, we'll lose our deposits. I'm sorry to hear that. She blinked. That's it. What would you like me to say? You've always helped, I nodded. Yes. So why not now? Because helping someone and enabling someone are two different things. She frowned. I don't understand. I know. Brandon folded his arms. Let's stop pretending this is about money. It isn't, I agreed. It's because you're upset about the wedding. I'm heartbroken about the wedding. Same difference. No, I shook my head. Very different. He looked confused. If I were simply upset, time would fix it. I looked directly at Emily. But your decision told me something. What? You were ashamed of me. Emily immediately protested. I wasn't ashamed. You said I'd ruin the photographs. You didn't say I'd embarrass you by making a scene. You didn't say I might drink too much. You didn't say I'd offend Brandon's parents. You said I'd ruin the pictures. She looked away. Because of how I looked. Her silence answered for her. I quietly closed the little window, not to end the conversation, because there was nothing left to say. Seconds later, Brandon slammed his palm against the door. This is unbelievable. He pulled out his phone. If you won't listen to reason, maybe you'll listen to the police. Emily looked startled. Brandon, no, he can't lock us out like this. I almost laughed. He honestly believed that. 5 minutes later, a Columbus police cruiser turned onto my street. 2 officers stepped out, a man and a woman. Both looked experienced enough to recognize a family argument before anyone opened their mouth. The male officer approached Brandon first. What's going on? Brandon pointed toward my house. My father-in-law locked us out. The officer glanced at him. Do you live here? No. Does your wife? Emily hesitated. No. The officer looked slightly puzzled. So, who owns the property? Brandon pointed toward the front door. He does. The officer blinked once, then looked back at him. I'm sorry. Can you explain why we're here? A gentle knock sounded on my door. I opened it. Just enough. The female officer smiled politely. Good afternoon, sir. Afternoon. I'm Officer Daniels. We received a call. I assumed. She glanced behind me. Mind if I ask a couple questions? Of course. Do these 2 live here? No. Do they have permission to enter? Not anymore. She nodded. Did they previously have keys? My daughter did. And you changed the locks? This morning. Why? I answered honestly. Because I no longer want anyone entering my home without my permission. She didn't write anything down. She simply nodded. May I ask if anyone has threatened anyone today? No. Any physical contact? No. She smiled politely. Thank you. The 2 officers stepped aside and quietly spoke together for less than a minute. Then Officer Daniels walked back toward Emily. I'm sorry, but your father hasn't committed any crime. Emily looked stunned. But I've always had a key. That doesn't establish residency. Brandon interrupted. But she's his daughter. Officer Daniels nodded. I understand. But being someone's adult child doesn't give you the legal right to enter their home. The male officer added gently, if the homeowner revokes permission and changes the locks, that's generally within his rights. Brandon's face turned red. So that's it. We're just supposed to leave. If he's asking you to leave his property. Yes. Emily looked like someone had knocked the air out of her lungs. She turned toward me. So, you really don't want me here? I met her eyes. I didn't say that. You just proved it. No. I spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. You proved something first. A tear rolled down her cheek. For the first time since the wedding, I saw genuine hurt. Not because she hadn't gotten her way, because perhaps for the first time she understood that actions have consequences. Before getting into the cruiser, Officer Daniels walked back toward me. In a voice barely above a whisper, she said, My father stopped speaking to me for 3 years. I looked at her. I was 25. I thought I knew everything. She smiled sadly. I wish someone had taught me sooner that parents have hearts too. She tipped her hat. I hope things work out. So do I. Emily and Brandon slowly walked back to their SUV. She climbed inside without saying another word. He started the engine. The vehicle pulled away. I stood on the porch until it disappeared around the corner. The neighborhood returned to its usual rhythm. Children rode bicycles. Someone walked a golden retriever. A delivery truck stopped 2 houses away. Life moved on. So did I. Or at least, I wanted to believe I had. That evening, I sat alone on my back patio watching the sun disappear behind the maple tree. The silence no longer felt lonely. It felt honest. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for my phone to ring with another request. I wasn't wondering whether I'd done enough. I wasn't trying to earn a place in my own daughter's life. If she wanted me there someday, she would have to come as my daughter, not as a customer visiting a bank. 3 weeks passed. No calls, no texts, no emails. Then one rainy Thursday evening, someone knocked gently on my front door. Not pounding, not demanding, just knocking. When I looked through the peephole, it wasn't Emily. It was someone I never expected to see standing on my porch. I opened the door expecting another argument. Instead, I found Brandon's father standing on my porch. His name was Charles Whitmore. We'd only met twice before. Once at Emily's engagement dinner. Once briefly after the wedding rehearsal dinner. At least the rehearsal dinner I hadn't been invited to, though I'd seen photos afterward. He looked different now. Less polished. His expensive navy blazer was wrinkled, and there were dark circles beneath his eyes. "Mr. Lawson," he said quietly, "I hope I'm not intruding." I stepped aside. "Come in." He entered slowly, looking around the house. "It feels comfortable." I smiled. "My wife always said a house should look lived in." He nodded. "My wife would have agreed." That surprised me. For some reason, I'd always assumed he and his wife agreed on everything. Apparently not. I poured 2 cups of coffee. For a few minutes, we talked about nothing important. The weather, traffic, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Eventually, Charles set his cup down. "I owe you an apology." I looked at him. "For what?" "For allowing my family to influence your daughter's decision." I didn't interrupt. I should have spoken up. "You knew," he nodded. "My wife became obsessed with appearances." He sighed deeply. "The guest list, the flowers, the seating chart, the photographs." His eyes dropped. "Especially the photographs." He rubbed his forehead. "I told her it wasn't worth hurting people." "What did she say?" "She said people would forget the food. They'd forget the music, but they'd remember the pictures forever." I couldn't help shaking my head. "The irony," I said quietly, "is that they'll probably remember this a lot longer." Charles gave me a tired smile. "I think you're right." He stood to leave. Before reaching the front door, he turned around. "Emily loves you." I didn't answer. "She made a terrible mistake." "I know. But sometimes people confuse fitting into someone else's world with improving their own." He extended his hand. "I'm sorry." I shook it. "So am I." After he left, I stood in the doorway for a long time. His apology didn't erase what had happened, but it reminded me that not everyone in Brandon's family lacked compassion. Sometimes the loudest voices simply drown out the wiser ones. A month passed. Life settled into a quiet routine. Every Tuesday morning, I volunteered with Habitat for Humanity. I'd always been good with tools, and they always needed another pair of hands. The first house I worked on belonged to a young single mother with 2 boys. The older boy watched me install kitchen cabinets. "Did you build houses your whole life?" I laughed. "No. I fixed electrical systems." "That's cool." His little brother looked up at me. "My grandpa can fix anything." I smiled. "So could I." The older boy tilted his head. "Can I help?" For the next hour, I taught him how to measure twice before cutting once. His excitement reminded me of Emily when she was little. She used to stand beside me in the garage holding a flashlight while I repaired bicycles. "Dad," she'd say proudly, "I'm helping." "You sure are." Those memories still hurt, but they no longer controlled me. One Friday afternoon, Walter called. "You heard..." "Heard what?" "Emily and Brandon canceled their honeymoon." I leaned back in my chair. "No. Linda ran into Emily at the grocery store." "What happened?" "They couldn't afford it." I stayed quiet. Walter continued. "Apparently, the wedding went way over budget." "I see." "They lost the Dubai reservation." I thanked him for letting me know. After hanging up, I sat quietly. I wasn't happy. That surprised me. A month earlier, I might have felt vindicated. Instead, I just felt sad. Nobody wins when families break apart. Over the following weeks, bits and pieces of information reached me through mutual friends. Brandon's company had gone through a major restructuring. The performance bonus he'd expected never came. The new furniture they'd financed for their downtown condo suddenly looked less affordable. Credit card balances grew. Arguments became frequent. They blamed each other for almost everything. One evening, Walter mentioned something else. "My niece works with Emily." "Oh," says she's been crying at work. I looked out my kitchen window. "I hope she's okay." Walter was silent for a moment. "You still love her." "I always will." "Then why don't you call..." I smiled sadly. "Because love isn't the same thing as rescuing someone from every consequence." Several days later, something happened that I never expected. My phone rang. Emily. I stared at her name until it stopped ringing. A voicemail notification appeared. I didn't listen to it. Not yet. An hour later, another call. Then another. 3 calls in one afternoon. For years, I'd answered every single one immediately. This time, I waited. not to punish her, to make sure I wasn't acting out of guilt. That night, I finally listened to the voicemail. Dad, she sounded exhausted. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. Long pause. I found something today. Her voice cracked. I was cleaning out some boxes at your house. She stopped herself. I mean, my old boxes. Another long silence. I found Mom's journals. That caught my attention. Mary kept journals for years. I'd packed them away after she passed, unable to read them. Emily continued. There were letters inside. They were addressed to me. I closed my eyes. Mary had never told me she'd written letters. I didn't know they existed. Emily was crying openly now. One of them said, she struggled to continue, if your father ever seems too protective, remember that he's trying to do the work of two parents with one broken heart. I felt my own eyes filling. She kept reading. Your father will never be perfect, but no one will ever love you more faithfully. The voicemail ended with quiet sobbing. No request for money, no excuses, just tears. I sat in my living room holding the phone. For the first time since the wedding, I believed my daughter might actually understand what she'd done. Not because I had changed the locks, not because the police had come, not because the honeymoon was canceled, because her mother's words had reached a place my anger never could. 3 evenings later, just after sunset, the doorbell rang. No pounding, no shouting, no demands. I looked through the peephole. Emily stood alone. No designer purse, no expensive jewelry, no perfectly styled hair. She looked tired, almost fragile. When I opened the door, she didn't try to step inside. She simply stood on the porch, holding a small cardboard box. I brought something, she whispered. What is it? She looked down. Everything you ever gave me. Inside the box, I could already see the spare house key, the credit card I'd kept her on for emergencies, the garage opener, even the old family cell phone I'd paid for years ago. Then she looked up. Her eyes were swollen from crying. I don't want your money anymore. Another tear rolled down her cheek. I just want my dad back. For the first time in weeks, I didn't know what to say. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Emily stood on my porch, holding that cardboard box as though it weighed 100 pounds. I looked inside again. The house key, the garage remote, the emergency credit card I'd insisted she keep years ago, a spare key to my old pickup, even the little laminated library card I'd helped her get when she was 8. She hadn't just returned things. She had returned every privilege she'd ever taken for granted. I don't want your money anymore, she repeated. I just want my dad back. I swallowed hard. Come inside. She hesitated. I know what you thought. I stepped aside. But you don't have to stand on the porch. She walked in slowly, almost like a stranger entering someone else's home. Maybe she was. Maybe we both were. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she told me I wasn't invited to her wedding, the same table where Mary had helped her practice multiplication tables, the same table where we'd celebrated birthdays, report cards, first jobs, and countless ordinary Tuesday dinners. So much life had happened around that table, and somehow we'd almost lost each other there. I poured 2 cups of coffee. Emily wrapped both hands around hers but didn't drink. I'm sorry, she said. I waited, not because I wanted to make her uncomfortable, because I wanted to hear everything she had come to say. She looked down. No, she shook her head. Sorry isn't enough. It isn't. I know. A tear slipped onto the table. I became someone Mom would have been ashamed of. I didn't answer. She continued. When Brandon proposed, I felt like I had finally made it. What does that mean? I kept comparing my life to everyone else's. The perfect house, the perfect wedding, the perfect pictures. She laughed bitterly. I spent so much time trying to impress people who barely knew me that I pushed away the one person who loved me before I had anything. She reached into her purse and pulled out one folded piece of paper. I brought this. It was one of Mary's letters. The edges were worn from being unfolded so many times over the past few weeks. Emily handed it to me. I've read it every day. I opened it carefully. Mary's handwriting hadn't changed in 22 years. She had written, if you're reading this, it means I'm no longer there to remind you of something important. Never measure people by what they wear, what they earn, or what others think of them. Measure them by who stays beside you when life becomes difficult. If you ever have to choose between protecting someone's pride and protecting your father's heart, choose your father. I stopped reading. My vision had become too blurry. Emily quietly finished the last sentence from memory. Because no photograph will ever love you back. The room fell silent. Mary had written those words long before Emily ever met Brandon, yet somehow she had seen this coming. "I'm not here to blame Brandon," Emily said after a while. "He made mistakes. So did I. I could have said no. I could have insisted you be there. I didn't." She wiped her eyes. "And that's on me." I nodded slowly. "Thank you." She looked surprised. "For what? For not blaming everyone else? It would have been easier." "It usually is." She looked around the house. "It feels different." "It is." "You redecorated," I smiled. "No." "I stopped waiting," she frowned. "What do you mean?" "I spent years waiting for phone calls, waiting for invitations, waiting to feel important. When I stopped waiting, I started living again." I told her about Habitat for Humanity, the little boys learning to use a tape measure, Walter and Linda, the quiet mornings in the garden, the evenings Mary and I had once dreamed about but never quite reached together. Emily listened without interrupting. "I missed all of that." "You did." "I'm sorry." "I know." A few days later, Brandon called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "Mr. Lawson?" "It's Richard." Long pause. "I owe you an apology." "You do." "I was arrogant." "Yes." "I thought success meant impressing people." "It doesn't." I encouraged Emily to worry about appearances. I should have protected her from that. I appreciated that he said I instead of we. Responsibility matters. "I'm trying to be a better husband." "I hope you are." "And a better son-in-law." I smiled. "That title isn't automatic." "I know. I'll earn it." "We'll see." It wasn't forgiveness. It was a beginning. The following Sunday, Emily asked if I'd like to visit the cemetery with her. We stood together beside Mary's grave carrying fresh white lilies. Emily knelt first. "I'm sorry, Mom," she cried openly. "I forgot what you tried to teach me." I placed my hand gently on her shoulder. "I think she'd be happy you're remembering now." On the way home, Emily asked if we could stop somewhere. Instead of a restaurant, she wanted to visit the old neighborhood park. The playground had been renovated. The swings were newer. The benches had been replaced. But one thing remained, the giant oak tree where I'd taught her to ride a bicycle. She laughed through her tears. "I fell 6 times. 7. "You counted." "I counted everything." "You always got back up." She smiled. "I guess I'm trying again." "So am I." Several months passed. We didn't magically become the perfect family. Trust doesn't return overnight. It arrives quietly, one honest conversation at a time. Emily started coming over every Wednesday evening for dinner. Sometimes Brandon came too. Sometimes he didn't. No one forced awkward conversations. No one pretended nothing had happened. Instead, we talked honestly about work, about mistakes, about Mary, about life. One afternoon, Emily handed me a wrapped package. Inside was a framed photograph, not from the wedding, not from an expensive photographer. It was an old picture I'd forgotten existed. I was kneeling beside an 8-year-old Emily in our driveway. We were repairing her bicycle together. Both of us were covered in grease. Both of us were laughing. On the back of the frame, she'd written, "This is the family picture I should have been proud of all along." I don't mind admitting that I cried. Happy tears this time. Looking back now, people sometimes ask whether sending $1 was my revenge. They're wrong. The dollar wasn't revenge. Changing the locks wasn't revenge. Those were boundaries. Real revenge would have been spending the rest of my life trying to make my daughter suffer. Instead, I chose something much harder. I gave her the chance to learn, and I gave myself permission to heal. Sometimes the strongest parents aren't the ones who keep giving. They're the ones brave enough to stop giving until respect returns. If this story reminded you of someone you love or someone you've taken for granted, I hope you'll reach out before pride builds a wall no locksmith can unlock. And if this story touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who needs the reminder that forgiveness begins with honesty and love grows strongest when it's rooted in mutual respect. Thank you for listening.